Jesus is with his disciples when he receives word that a really good friend, Lazarus, is deathly sick. Mary and Martha have sent word to Jesus saying, Jesus, we need you to come before it's too late. Lazarus is on his deathbed and he's not going to make it, and the only person that can do anything about it is you. Jesus receives this word, he receives this message, and he sends message back. Lazarus isn't going to die. Death is not going to take Lazarus. But Jesus does something interesting in the mix of all of this. Instead of responding immediately, he decides to wait 2 days before heading to Bethany, where Lazarus is. And this is really out of character. If you've ever had a loved one who's been in the hospital, you've ever had a friend who's been in the hospital and they've been on their deathbed, that you've been called in, you know you just rush. You drop everything that you're doing and you just head there quickly. But Jesus doesn't do that in this moment. He sits where he is for 2 days with his disciples. And in these 2 days, Lazarus passes, Lazarus dies, and they wrap him in linen clothes or in funeral clothes, and they put him in a tomb. And Mary and Martha are sobbing, they're sad, they're weeping, they're distraught, they're in despair, they've lost all hope. At this point, the town is mourning the loss of Lazarus. The disciples don't know it yet, but all of this has happened. And Jesus finally begins speaking to the disciples, and he tells them, Lazarus has gone to sleep. And the disciples are thinking to themselves, that's a good thing, Jesus. If he's asleep, that means he's resting and he's going to get better. And Jesus was trying to gently let them know that Lazarus has passed. So Jesus plainly tells them, no, Lazarus is dead. And we kind of have to stop and we kind of have to sit in that moment. And it's an uncomfortable moment. It's a moment none of us want to sit in. We don't like to sit in the moment of death. When death has taken life from us, when death has taken the life of one of our loved ones, of one of our loved friends. But that's what they do. They sit in the moment. They soak in the despair. They soak in the hopelessness, not because they want to, but because they have to, because death robbed them of hope. And finally, Jesus decides to start heading to Bethany, but some of the disciples object strangely. They tell Jesus, if the last time we were in Judea, people tried to kill you. I mean, if you go back there, they're going to kill you. Lazarus is already dead. Why would you go back at this point? There's nothing you can do. Maybe they didn't say that out loud, but I can guarantee you that's what some of them were feeling. And that's when Thomas, who just sadly gets labeled as the doubting Thomas, which is an unfortunate name for him, that's when Thomas stands up. And Thomas tells everyone else, Jesus, if you're going to go die in Judea, we're going to go die with you. As far as Thomas was concerned, it was better to go die with Jesus than it was to live without him. So Thomas was all in. He was going. So the disciples get everything together. Jesus gets his stuff together, and they head towards Bethany. They head towards Judea. And when they get there, they meet Martha. Jesus meets Martha, and Martha comes out to him just crying, Jesus, had you been here, my brother would still be alive. What happened? And Jesus looks at her, Martha, your brother will rise from the dead. And she didn't know what that meant just at that moment. She kind of thought, well, yeah, of course, on the resurrection, he will rise again, but why weren't you here now? And Jesus says to her, do you believe I am who I say I am? And she says, of course I believe who you are. I believe you're the Messiah. I believe you're the Christ. And he tells Martha, I want you to go get Mary. Mary was back in the house, just beside herself. She was just distraught. She was torn up at everything going on. She just couldn't handle it anymore. So Martha secretly goes and gets Mary, and Mary comes to Jesus and she falls at his feet and she is just sobbing. She is a wreck. Jesus, had you been here, my brother would still be alive. He would still be alive, but now he's not. And I sit in this hopelessness and I sit in this despair. Where were you? And Jesus was filled with compassion. He was filled with love. He was filled with anger too. He was angry at death. He was angry at what death had stolen from this family because he loved this family. And Jesus begins to weep himself because he knows just how destructive death is. He knows what death steals from people. Death steals life from people. So Jesus walks up to the tomb and he tells the people, I want you to remove this boulder from this tomb. And Martha rushes in and says, Jesus, you can't do that. Lazarus has been dead 4 days already. The stench of death is going to be strong. We can't do that. And Jesus looks at Martha. Did I not ask you who I was? Did I not ask you if you believed in me? She says, yes, I do. Remove that boulder. So they remove the boulder, and of course the stench of death comes out. Lazarus is dead. Lazarus is as dead gets. 4 days dead. And the people know it. And Jesus looks up to heaven. He says to the Father, thank you for hearing me. And he did that so that the people would know who he was working on behalf of. He was working for the Father. He was working for God. And Jesus, with a loud voice, assertively, he shouts into the tomb. He shouts through the stench of death. He shouts through the darkness, and he says, Lazarus, come out. And here comes Lazarus in his funeral clothes, in his funeral linens, still wrapped up tightly, wobbling out of this tomb. And you can imagine the sheer disbelief of some of the people. How could this be? This man truly is a man of God. Jesus is the Messiah. Lazarus has come out, and the people, I'm sure, are shocked. And I'm sure are wondering what in the world is going on. And Jesus tells them, I want you to go unwrap Lazarus from his funeral clothes, and I want you to release him. I want you to take the funeral clothes off of him, and I want you to put clothes of life on him. And it's not just a physical moment. It's not just a physical thing that's happening where they're taking these clothes off Lazarus. It's a spiritual thing that's happening too. Jesus is staring death in the face, and he's looking death eye to eye. He's saying, unwrap your arms around my child. Unwrap your arms around my friend and release him. Because I'm going to give him life, because I am the resurrection and life. And it's an amazing moment. It's a picture of who God really is and how God really works. It's a picture of Jesus that is a Jesus full of compassion and hope and grace and love and power. So here's my prayer for you this week. Here's my prayer for myself this week. Every single one of us in this world face death. We do. There's nothing we can do about it. There's something Jesus can do about it, but there's nothing we can do about it. And death wants to put its arms around us, and death wants to squeeze the life right out of us. And Jesus wants to step in, and Jesus wants to say, unwrap your arms from around my kid, from around my child, from around my friend, and release them, because I'm going to clothe them with life.